Who was one of the original members of the U.S. Army's Delta Force and ultimately commanded all of the Army's Green Berets. Today, we're proud to announce he serves as Executive Vice President of the Family Research Council. Ladies and gentlemen, as these men come to the stage, would you not just welcome them, but would you also thank them for their service to the United States of America?
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Please be seated. My name is Jerry Boykin, and as you know, Tony Perkins is a Marine, and I normally start my presentations here with a Marine joke. Having said that, General Conway is a retired Commandant in the Marine Corps, so I'm going to skip that part of it out of fear for my life. And we're going to go right into it. Listen, I know we all as Americans are very concerned about what we see today unfolding really across the globe with the chaos that we see, with the evil that is rising up in so many places around the world, and particularly what we see in the Middle East right now. So I've asked our three panelists today, which I will introduce, to make a very brief opening statement, and then we'll, as our time permits, we'll ask them some specific questions. That I have already selected with regards to the situation. Our first panelist today is really a man who has been a supporter of the Family Research Council for a long time. He is a representative from the 11th District of North Carolina, Congressman Mark Meadows. Yeah, we got at least one Tar Heel out there, so thank you very much. He was actually, grew up in a military family. His father was an Army officer, and he was born in Verdun, France, and then eventually moved back to Florida, but he started a small business. He's run a small business for 27 years, has an extensive resume. What you need to know about him is he's a freshman in Congress. He'll be back next term for his second term in Congress, and he is one of our staunchest allies and supporters, and he is the man who worked with Tony Perkins to be able to bring this woman that's going to come tomorrow night to be honored, Miriam Ibrahim. He was right there with Tony bringing her back. Now, my favorite Marine here, who actually used to be my neighbor at Fort Myer, Virginia, I'm not, just so you know, Jim, I'm not going to use any multisyllabic words because you're on the panel today. So I'm going to be very careful. But look, this is a soldier, so to speak. I mean, an extraordinary man. Came in the Marine Corps in 1970. He came from Southeast Missouri State University into the Marine Corps, an infantry officer in the Marine Corps, beginning in 1970, ultimately rising to be Commandant. But you need to know that he's commanded at every level in the Marine Corps. And in fact, this is the guy that commanded the U.S. Marine troops, the first expeditionary element there at the Battle of Fallujah in 2003. And then finally, an old and dear friend, and now not only kind of a minister in his own right, but also a prolific author, Major General retired Bob Dees. And Bob has written 3 books. One is called Resilient Warriors, the second one is Resilient Leaders, and the third is Resilient Nation. It is a trilogy. Bob is an infantry officer, West Point graduate in 1972. He went on to command the 2nd Infantry Division, and ultimately, as for those of you who have a great passion for Israel, as I do, Bob actually commanded a task force there called a Combined Task Force for Missile Defense in Israel from 2000 to 2002. And he's just been a great friend. He and his wife Kathleen have resettled in Texas. And so in your case, I don't know what you've been smelling down there in the plains of Texas, so I'm going to give you a break today if you use some words that we don't understand, okay? So that said, I'd like to start with General Conway, who, by the way, has to leave us a little early for another event that he's doing here at the hotel. So I'm going to ask him to make an opening statement here.
From
and
here?
Then, yeah, from right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thanks, Jerry, for the nice introduction. My mother would be happy with that introduction. My mother-in-law would still be skeptical, but that's another story. And folks, it is great to be with you this morning. I apologize for having to leave early because I think it's going to be a great session in its finality. The Chinese have an old expression, and may you always live in interesting times. And I think we're there. Just to cover quickly, we've got turmoil in the Middle East times 3. Of course, in Syria, with a four-sided fight that's taking place there, the establishment of a caliphate, which has always been the Islamic extremist grand strategy. Moving east, you've got a situation in Iraq that hopefully will get better in the near term as the new government starts to take shape, as they revitalize their army, include the Kurds, who are pretty tough guys in this fight, and our old friends, the Sunni tribal leaders, I think, have a direct conflict now that's going to open itself with ISIS, because ISIS is going to attempt to consolidate this caliphate. They're going to come into conflict with the Sunnis in Anbar province that don't buy their dogma, and we need to get involved in that. And time is an issue here. The sooner, really, the better. Iran, just further west, is a real problem for us. In many ways, but not least, of course, which is the nuclear issue, and we should not lose sight on that in my mind. If I were still advising the President, I would have two elements of advice for him on Iran. One, we don't need them with what we're going to do in the Middle East. We are powerful enough to do it without them, and to involve them only makes us look weaker and them look stronger. So please don't do that, Mr. President. The second thing is, don't lose sight of the long-term objective to make sure that Iran does not one day possess nuclear weapons. It will cause tremendous instability in that region of the world. They're seen as the major power already. To have them have nuclear weapons is simply going to cause weapons to proliferate in countries like Egypt and Turkey and perhaps even Egypt. So we just don't need that. Russia. In my mind, Vladimir Putin is a very dangerous man. We're all products of our experience, but his experience when the wall came down was that he was a lieutenant colonel in the KGB. For most of the rest of us, it was the introduction of a new world order. For him, it was abject defeat. And now he's in a position, I think he believes, to do something about that. He's very narcissistic, which makes him in some ways unpredictable. But he also has the advantage of location, a powerful nation we should never forget. There's one nation on the face of the earth that could destroy us tonight, and that's Mother Russia. And I think intent in this case to poke us in the eye every chance he has for as long as he has the opportunity to do that. If you move all the way out west to the Pacific and China, China concerns me. You know, there's little history of major trading partners actually coming to conflict. And yet, in the case of China, it concerns me for the long term. Part of that is because the most bombastic people in China, with their newfound military and power projection capability, are their admirals and generals. Normally, pardon me, sir, it's a politician who is hammering the table, but in this case, it's the admirals and the generals. And the last time we saw that, folks, was pre-World War II Japan. So I'll finish with these thoughts. There are lots of challenges out there that require U.S. leadership. Some of these issues, I think, exist now because of the vacuum that our absence of leadership has caused in the past. So I would offer, again, we need to stay involved. We need to be in a leading role in virtually all of these with our partners and allies. And to do that, we need a strong Department of Defense that is able to respond to our Commander-in-Chief. Thank you.
Thank you, General Conway. Congressman Meadows.
I'll keep it real brief. We need to be a country that means what we say and says what we mean. You know, it is time that we quit apologizing for America's greatness and start celebrating. You know, we have a national security risk, and the general said it well. Right now, we've taken our eye off the ball because of what is happening with ISIL and the horrific things that have been reported. But Iran, a nuclear Iran, is the greatest national security threat that we've faced, not only for us, but for Israel. And what we must do is stand up to that. This morning, there are reports coming out of the State Department that we need to meet Iran halfway. Meeting Iran halfway is a major, major mistake, and it's something that we must not stand for. I'm going to close with this. We need a foreign policy that truly makes a clear objective of what we stand for and what we will tolerate and what we will not tolerate. Teddy Roosevelt said, "Walk softly and carry a big stick." This president walks softly and gives a good speech. And we need to make sure that we stand with the men and women who fight and protect our country and honor them in their service. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. General Dees.
Thank you, and I think that's a very good strategic overview by General Conway, and sir, thank you for the call to action and the clarity is what I'm hearing you say, and you're saying that deterrence is important, and that would be my first comment. Walk softly, carry big stick is all about deterrence. How do we deter? That's the ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure. Secondly, the importance of strategy. We have an expression in the Army, at least, that says strategy eats tactics for breakfast. And the point is, what we're doing in Syria and a few other pinpoint places is tactical reflex responses rather than a strategic, broad perspective that goes towards an end state that is worthwhile and discernible. I'm going to make 4 points very quickly. If you aim at nothing, you will surely hit it. We must be clear about the threats. We've talked up here about a number of different threats. I will identify 3 additional threats with laser focus. First of all, before the Obama administration, it was called GWAT, Global War on Terror. It is global. Our military is in 100 nations plus around the world today, and they're not twiddling their thumbs. They are resisting evil in lots of forms, and it's all rooted, largely rooted, in this Islamic fundamental terrorism. Global war, it is a war, and it is terrorism. So let's call it what it is. Let's be sure we know what we're aiming at. We have a lot of external threats. That's from my book, the primary one, because it's like a cancer. It's death by 1,000 cuts. But the 2 other threats that I would identify briefly is our internal apathy is a national security issue. More people like you need to stand up to be counted. And then the third one is that we have been infiltrated. The enemy is within. I came back after 9/11. A few days later, I was in Europe at the time to check out the intelligence. In about 30 seconds, I saw the deal. I saw liquid displays up on this dome. It showed cell phone calls coming from Kandahar, Afghanistan, going to places like Lackawanna, New York, Greenville, North Carolina, Nashville, Tennessee, Dearborn, Michigan. These are all Islamic sanctuaries in the United States within which there are fundamentalist sleeper cells. All those calls lit up, and in 30 seconds I saw that we have been infiltrated badly. We can talk about that more lately, but we got to figure out how to observe national security inside our borders. Secondly, international affairs and domestic affairs are inseparable. You've heard talk of the tree of liberty that is fed by the blood of patriots. Well, the tree of liberty is not just on the international side or on the domestic side. It is both. Within our country today, we have a pervasive culture of appeasement. On the domestic side, it looks like entitlements. It looks like catering to special interest groups. It looks like catering to our illegal border and not securing our border. That's what appeasement domestically looks like. And then internationally, we know all about Neville Chamberlain, and we continue to appease today. As the Congressman said, we appease Iran, we appease red lines that we make and then break. So you get the point. Those are our three threats. And I think it's critical that we recognize this enemy and we deal with it, and that our domestic situation, our moral erosion, our internal apathy, and our own infiltration are part and parcel to our national security. American exceptionalism, missioned in a brief word, we are an exceptional nation. You drive around Washington, D.C., you look at the monuments, you say, look at all the grandeur. But if you go to Moscow, if you go to Beijing, you see the same grandeur, and you say, this is impressive. And yet that grandeur hides murder of millions of people. It hides totalitarianism. And so what makes America different is not the grandeur. It is America has a very heart and soul into which God himself breathed life. We are an exceptional nation. And then finally, so what? We're all asking the question, so what? I'll be brief. Francis Schaeffer said, how then shall we live? And in Psalms 11:3 it says, if the foundations are destroyed, what should the righteous do? You men and women of America, you great patriots, are the righteous. We've got to stand up to be counted. I would say it is a great time to be alive. If you have a warrior spirit within the depth of your soul, it is a great time to be alive, because greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. And so let's get to business.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you all. All right, I'm going to go to General Conway. General Conway now really dedicates his life to this whole issue of national security, and he speaks about it, and he is now working with an organization called Securing America's Future Energy. And General Conway, I want to give you an opportunity to speak about the criticality in terms of national security of our energy resources.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. You know, and I would argue it's not just national security. You can make the case it's international security if you look at what's happening with Russia and Ukraine and sort of the leverage that Putin is exhibiting there. But my concern, folks, is that it's not as bad as it was. At one point, we were importing 60% of our total petroleum requirement. Of that 60%, a large portion goes to transportation, and our transportation industry, the cars you and I drive, and more importantly, I think, for purposes of our economy, the trucks that go over the road, require 92% petroleum products. And my concern is that the diversification is not there. And today, this year, we'll import about 30% of that requirement. And the countries that are controlling this global market, which is by no means a free market. We have a free market in this country, but the global market is very much contrived. And it's controlled largely by nations in OPEC, who then, in many ways, control our destiny. Our Islamic extremist enemy has said that they will defeat us eventually, not in the field. They can't beat our armies in the field, but they will destroy our economies through control and or manipulation of this oil supply. So we consider it a national security issue. Our production in recent years is better. It gives us more of a buffer. If there's a fire refinery or bad weather or something else obtuse happens, we don't see prices jerk up like they used to. But we cannot achieve oil independence simply through our own production. It's too small. It goes to this global market. And so the answer is both supply and demand. We've got to do more drilling, in my mind. We've got to open up federally mandated areas. But at the same time, we need to, I think, develop alternative energy sources that will reduce that requirement, that 92%. That we rely on so much. Not by investing in companies. That's been tried and failed, obviously. But through investing in national laboratories, university laboratories that can come up with products that will then go to this free market in America and make us stronger, I think, and safer in the long term.
Thank you very much, General Conway. Congressman Meadows, would you talk to us for a minute about our southern border and how you see that being an issue of national security, Do you think that we have been infiltrated with anything other than day workers or people that are just here to sell marijuana or cocaine? Is there anything else that's come across that border? What is your assessment, and what should we do about it?
Well, our southern border needs to certainly be secured. In May alone, some 9,000 young people came across the border. It made national headlines. All of us saw that, and we were somehow shocked and surprised that that was happening. And yet it made national news because we were taking those kids and we were busing them all over the United States to take care of them. The bigger problem is a national security problem that if we have ISIL and other terrorist groups, which Hezbollah is all over Latin America. You know, when you really look at that, they have cells and active groups in Colombia and Panama and other areas. And to have that open border just allows the terrorists to be among us. And for many of you, I'm from North Carolina, many of you think that, well, you live in relative peace and that's not happening because you don't see the threat in your neighborhood. But I can tell you in North Carolina, as the General has mentioned, not only in Greenville, North Carolina, but we have convicted in Charlotte, North Carolina, a Hezbollah cell. They actually were there. They were convicted. But that wasn't enough. They came back and they said what they were going to do is kill the prosecutor. They were going to blow up the courthouse. You can Google it. You can find out all about it. So for us to think that an open southern border is a secure border, is the tragedy is going to be when the headlines become on one of these terrorist groups take advantage of us here in the United States, and we've got to address it.
Thank you. Thank you. General Dees, let me ask you a question that I didn't prep you for backstage here, but I like messing with you because we're old friends. Would you please talk to us about the current state of our military? And I mean, that is a very serious national security issue. Can we rise to the occasion? Are we prepared to defend this nation against the threats that we see on the horizon, that our intelligence community tells us we should be focused on? What's your assessment?
My assessment is that our military has been at war for over a decade, and really if you think about General Boykin's time in the military, we've been in this global war on terror as well as everything else going on in the world since 1979, 1980. So it's and then of recent, I was yesterday at Fort Meade. I was with folks that have been deployed 7 years out of the last 10 years. So they are digging deep. They are digging deeply into their well of courage. But what depletes their well of courage the most is that they feel perhaps a lack of support, lack of coherence from their commander-in-chief and national strategies. Our military people have committed themselves to serve and even to die. That's the contract that they have signed. And the thing that really takes wind out of their sails is if they think they might be not utilized in the proper way, or if the commander-in-chief does not have the backbone to stay the course. So that's a problem. And then another issue I would mention is that for the troops in the foxhole, faith makes a difference. When they're getting ready to go on a dangerous patrol in Afghanistan or Iraq, they'll hold hands and they'll say, God, you're our rock, our fortress, our deliverer, the strong tower to whom we can run. They are not worried about political correctness when they're getting ready to take artillery. Now, conversely, when you get inside the Beltway of Washington, D.C., we have a lot of political correct games that are being played that simply mirror our culture. Many of you are cultural warriors day in and day out. Those same games, those same wars afflict our military. They take from their well of courage. They reduce our readiness. So our military, if committed to clear and noble causes, will perform admirably. We're still the best military in the world. And as I will make maybe later a comment, when we're outsourcing military tasks of very urgent national security nature to a JV, rather than employing the own American varsity in very precise surgical ways, then we're not doing the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Dees. Congressman, let me turn to you and ask you for your personal assessment on the concept of arming and equipping the Free Syrian Army. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, any time that you look at putting men and women in harm's way, it is probably the toughest vote that you will ever take. And recently we made a vote in the House to do just that. I was one of the ones that voted no. I felt like it was... you have to ask yourself a few questions. We spent billions of dollars training Iraqi troops only to see them turn and run when ISIL came in. We had in Benghazi, we had Libyans that were supposed to be helping with the security of the consulate there, and yet what happened, we know all too well, 4 dead Americans. We are now in the process of training 5,000 to 6,000 Syrians that are supposed to go up and take on a battle-tested army of over 31,000. It may be closer to 40,000 by the time that they are trained and ready. And somehow we think that these 5,000 Syrians are going to be able to do the job. The general said it best. We have the best fighting men and women and national security team in the world. And yet what we're doing is we're putting it out for bid with Syrians somewhere else. And for me, that was very troubling. And it is not something that I believe that it will have a clear strategy for success, and something that I know that we'll be having to come back and address again.
Thank you very much. General Dees, same question.
I totally subscribe to what the Congressman just said. The reality is in Syria, we don't know what we don't know. Intelligence is a very critical commodity, and I found that you can get a lot of troops and soldiers hurt badly if you don't have the right intelligence. So we need to develop this intelligence framework that will serve us well in Syria. And then as we employ U.S. surgical forces, not massive troops, but as we employ surgical techniques with boots on the ground as well as from the air, then I think that's a way we can quickly make their day with ISIS in Syria, and that's a way to avoid casualties, not produce casualties, which this long slog will in fact do. The second thing is that I think, I'll use this as a bit of a segue, we have greater priorities in the region. I'm very concerned that the United States continues to sound an uncertain trumpet about support of the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
Just a brief vignette. I was in Israel as part of my duties, and I was pulled out of bed one night by the Israeli General Staff. They had taken down a ship trying to infiltrate into Gaza Strip. It had high technology. They would drop these shipping containers that would float about 10 feet under the water. Fishermen would come out from Gaza Strip. They would take it into underground caves, and then the next day they'd be shooting them towards Israel. The reason they woke me up is because Israel had called the U.S. State Department at that moment in time and said, hey, we got this issue and this and this. And basically our State Department said, oh, you guys are just hyping it again. Go back to sleep. Well, that just illustrates the culture that permeates our State Department at present and at that time. And so we need to be very clear about our support of the nation of Israel. If Israel goes down, we all go down. Israel are God's people. It's a moral issue as well as a practical issue.
Amen. Let me break protocol here and just make a statement. I want to reinforce and support what the Congressman said, and I want to thank you for voting no on this. Look, And there are people in here that believe that the right way to go is to arm and equip this thing called the Free Syrian Army. But there are some things that you need to think about and you need to understand, and we'll just have to disagree on this, on the prudence of this. But you need to understand that there are no redeeming features to Bashar al-Assad. He's an evil despot. But you know what he's never done? He's never been a threat to Christians. And when you look at the realities of what's happening to the Christian communities in Egypt and Syria and Iraq and Libya and all of these Islamic countries, the reality is he's never been a threat to Christians. The other thing is he's never been a threat to Israel. He's never, other than rhetoric, he's never really made any serious attempts to invade Israel and get the Golan Heights back. So when we start talking about arming and equipping 5,000 people that we haven't vetted, we also need to reflect on the fact that we did this in other places like Afghanistan and Iraq, and many of those people that had been vetted turned on us and killed our troops in their own bases. So why would we invest more blood and treasure in arming and equipping people that we don't know ultimately what they're going to do with the arms and the equipment? And in the case of the Iraq Army, they've already given theirs to ISIS, the very people that we're now trying to stop. We're trying to stop by destroying American-made equipment that we left in the hands of the Iraqi army. So I think that if you can get beyond the emotion of this, we've got to do something. We've got to do something to stop ISIS. And by the way, I don't call them ISIL. When you say ISIL, what you're really doing is you're failing to recognize the existence of Israel, because the Levant is a concept that does not include. Now, most people don't know that, and I understand that, but I say ISIS. But that said, we really need to get beyond the emotion of it and think in terms of what's the practical side of arming and equipping these people that we don't know what they're ultimately going to do, and we already know that there's been a pact made with ISIS, a non-aggression pact made with ISIS. I know Senator McCain denies that vehemently, but my sources and many other sources are saying that it is absolutely true. I'll go to the Congressman now. I want to ask you another question, Congressman. We are yet to have accountability on Benghazi. What is your assessment of what the long-term impact of never getting to the answers on Benghazi? What's the long-term impact of that? How does that affect us as a nation, as a society, if we don't do the right thing with regards to Benghazi here?
Well, if we don't get to the bottom of it, which I believe that we will, my good friend Trey Gowdy is he is a true patriot. He is, regardless of what you may read, he is not political. What he wants to do is make sure that the American people get the truth, and that we hold those that are responsible. And we can be very thankful that Chairman Gowdy is over that. So we will get to the bottom of it. However, in the meantime, when the truth does not come out, we repeat the mistakes of the past. We're starting to see that right now in the strategy that we have, in my opinion, the strategy or the non-strategy that we have with regards to addressing the terrorist groups that are trying to kill Americans and our allies every day. But the other part of that is that when we start to look at a false narrative that comes from our government, it undermines the very trust that we have in those that are elected, in our overall government operations. And all the American people want is the truth. And we know that the truth always prevails. It will always ultimately come out. But if we do not, if we suppress it, whether it's that or the IRS or anything else, then what ultimately happens is we continue to undermine the credibility, and we create a more unstable situation. So I have great hope that justice will prevail and that Chairman Gowdy will get to the bottom of it.
Thank you very much. General Dees, same question.
Thank you, Congressman. I would gain altitude just a second. I think I've written about historic or spiritual infrastructure as an element of national power. And one of the elements of that spiritual infrastructure of the United States of America is the proper retention of national history instead of historical revisionism to fit a convenient narrative. Okay? The historical revisionism that we see in Benghazi is symptomatic of historical revisionism we see across our country, across the world of politics, and even in the Common Core curriculum, for instance, of the Obama administration. Let's change the truth. In war, truth is the first casualty. Let's change the truth to fit our liberal agenda objectives, our narrative, and we see it happening left and right. We've got to resist that stringently and tell what happened the way it happened. Thanks, Jerry.
Okay, thank you. We're down to about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to go to Congressman and ask you for a brief assessment of the strategy that has been laid out by our President to deal with this threat of ISIS.
Well, there is not a strategy. I mean, and I think even he admitted that he didn't have one. So as we see that, there is a real desire on the part of almost all Americans to make sure that we deal with it. The threat is real. It is a threat against American interest and against American people. We need to understand that. And yet, what we need to do is to make sure that we have a clear, decisive objective, one that is strategical and focused, as the General Dees was indicating. And if we do not have that, then what happens is we have a lot of dollars that are spent, billions and billions of dollars that will be spent in a camouflage of doing something to protect the national interest, and yet it doesn't. You know, when you have people at the State Department that says our greatest national security threat is climate change, you got an issue. I mean, in the morning, how ridiculous is that when you have our fighting men and women, they get up and they say, man, it's a little chilly. Maybe today is the day that we got to worry about climate change. It's just ridiculous.
General Dees.
The same question. What strategy? Yeah, thank you, Congressman. What strategy would be the question? And I would offer that we are in a very complex environment, and the reality is complexity requires strategy, whether you're in business or any endeavor to include the employment of national power, both internally and externally. We are playing chess, not checkers, and our administration needs to recognize that. Thank you.
I'm going to close this out. And some of you may have seen it. I was asked last week to do Judge Janine's program Saturday night, and I went to a studio in Atlanta, and the question came up of how can we put 3,000 troops on the ground so quickly to fight Ebola when we can't come up with a strategy to deal with ISIS? And here's my answer. In America, remember, we got what we asked for. This president is thinking like a community organizer, not a commander-in-chief that takes the lives and the futures of his soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines seriously. We've got a community organizer that has surrounded himself with people that know everything about climate change, everything about Marxism, everything about the LGBT agenda, but virtually nothing about national security. And he's unwilling to listen to his real professionals, that's the military professionals, because he doesn't trust them, because they represent something that he's never been able to understand. And that's a love for America. May God bless you. Give our panel a hand.